Have you ever really looked, like intently, obsessively stared at a straight wooden stick halfway submerged in a clear glass of water?
Oh, yeah, the classic refraction illusion.
Right.
Yeah.
It is this totally normal childhood observation, but it actually holds a pretty terrifying secret. Because when you look at that stick, your eyes tell you a very specific, very convincing story.
Yeah, they tell you the stick is broken.
Exactly. It looks jagged. It appears to be bent at this utterly impossible angle just below the surface of the water.
And the visual information flooding into your optical nerve is completely unambiguous. I mean, your brain is rendering an image, and that image is screaming at you, demanding you believe that the physical integrity of the wood has been compromised.
But then, you reach into the water, you run your index finger along the submerged part of the wood, and it is perfectly uninterruptedly straight. You pull it out of the water, and it's straight. You plunge it back in, broken. Your eyes and your hands, which are like two of your most trusted biological instruments, are reporting two entirely different, totally incompatible realities to your brain at the exact same time.
It forces a massive crisis of faith in your own biology. I mean, when we strip away the elementary school physics explanation, the philosophical implications are deeply unsettling.
Very unsettling.
You are put in a position where you have to actively choose which of your senses to trust and, which one you are going to dismiss as a liar.
That is the exact word, a liar. And it forces you to ask a really terrifying follow-up question. Like, if my eyes can casually lie to me about a mundane stick in a glass of water, what else are they lying about?
Right. Is the sky actually blue?
Yeah. Or is the table I'm leaning on actually solid? Am I seeing reality as it actually is? Or am I just experiencing a highly convincing, personalized hallucination?
Which is the perfect entry point for us.
It really is. So welcome to this customized deep dive. If you've been following along with us, this audio overview is the 5th installment in our ongoing series, Exploring Philosophy.
And in our previous discussions, we've touched on, various historical eras, political theories, and specific thinkers. But today, we are basically hitting the emergency brake.
We have to. We have no choice but to stop and recalibrate. Because before we can even attempt to understand specific historical thinkers or try to build complex ethical systems, we must first establish the absolute core tools and rules of reality.
Right, because if we don't know what reality is, we literally can't build a philosophy on top of it.
Exactly. These rules form the baseline for absolutely everything else you will ever think, feel, or argue. So the mission for this deep dive is to explore the foundational bedrock of all thought. We are diving into epistemology.
Epistemology. It is a big, intimidating, multisyllabic academic word.
It really is, but its core definition is brilliantly simple. It is simply the study of how we know what we know.
Like, what is the actual definition of knowledge?
Right. How do human beings acquire it? And probably most importantly, how can we ever be absolutely mathematically certain that we actually possess it?
Well, in the context of modern Western philosophy, this entire field is defined by a massive, centuries-long, heavyweight intellectual boxing match.
A total brawl.
Yeah, and the repercussions of this fight are still felt in every science lab, courtroom, and honestly, late-night argument today. In one corner, you have the school of thought known as Rationalism, and in the opposing corner, you have Empiricism.
The central conflict of the modern mind. So let's stake out the territory for the listener really quick.
Good idea.
Rationalism is the deeply held belief that reason, pure logic, and the internal workings of the intellect are the primary sources of human knowledge. Rationalists claim that we can know profound, undeniable truths about the universe entirely independently of our physical sensory experience.
And empiricism takes the exact opposite stance. It is the belief that the human mind begins as a void, like a completely blank slate.
Nothing on it at all.
Right. According to the empiricists, absolutely all knowledge without exception is derived from sensory experience and physical experimentation. To an empiricist, if you haven't seen it, touched it, tasted it, or heard it, you cannot possibly claim to know it.
I want to make sure you, the listener, understand that this isn't just an abstract, dusty academic debate debated by men in powdered wigs.
Not at all.
This is an active battle over whether you can trust your own eyes, your own internal logic, and your own basic assumptions about how the universe operates around you right now.
And to truly understand how this whole detective story unfolds, we have to travel back to the early 17th century to meet the founder of modern rationalism.
Yes, a man who decided to build an unshakable, impenetrable fortress of human knowledge. But to clear the land for that fortress, He first had to detonate a psychological nuclear bomb under absolutely everything he thought he knew.
The architect of that intellectual demolition is René Descartes.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So the year is 1619. Descartes is a brilliantly talented French mathematician, scientist, and philosopher. But despite all his accomplishments, he is suffering from a profound intellectual crisis.
Why? What's going on with him?
Well, he looks back at his education and realizes that throughout his entire life, he has casually accepted countless falsehoods as absolute truths. The science of his day is constantly being overturned. The astronomy of yesterday is basically the punchline of today.
Right, so he realizes that the entire structure of his personal knowledge is built on a foundation of sand.
Exactly. He is basically looking at his own mind and realizing the software is corrupted with thousands of bugs, and he has no idea which files are actually safe to open.
So what does he do?
On November 10th, 1619, he locks himself in a stove-heated room just to stay warm.
Basically sitting in an oven.
Yeah, pretty much. And he experiences this radical intellectual rebirth. He decides he has to tear the whole house down to the bedrock. He develops a philosophical methodology that we now call radical doubt.
Radical doubt. Okay,
Oh.
how does that work?
His rule is incredibly strict. If a belief can be subjected to even the slightest, most microscopic, theoretically possible amount of doubt, he's going to throw it out entirely. He will treat it as if it were completely false.
Wow. The rigor of that method is hard to overstate. It is a terrifying psychological exercise. Most of us try to ignore our doubts just to stay sane.
Right, but Descartes leans into them. He starts naturally with his senses. He notes, just as we did with a refracting stick in the water, that his senses sometimes deceive him.
And he formulates a very practical rule for his demolition project, right?
He does. He says it is a mark of prudence never to place our complete trust in those who have deceived us even once. So if the eyes lie about the stick, the eyes are permanently off the jury.
The senses are out. Done. But he goes so much further than just pointing out optical illusions. He starts questioning the very nature of his immediate reality.
Yeah, he brings up the concept of dreams.
Think about this for a second. Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so utterly convincing, that you were absolutely 100% certain you were awake?
Oh, definitely.
Right. In the dream, you feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. You taste the bitterness of coffee. You feel the solid ground beneath your feet. But the reality is, you're actually lying horizontally in a dark, silent room, totally paralyzed in REM sleep.
And Descartes realizes, with this creeping sense of horror, that there are absolutely no definitive, conclusive signs to distinguish being awake from being asleep at any given moment.
That is just wild.
The dream argument is where the ground really starts to give way. He strips away the reliability of the physical world, the existence of his own physical body, the sky, the earth. It could all be a dream.
But surely, Descartes thinks, even in the wildest, most chaotic dream, 2 plus 3 still equals 5.
Right.
Surely a square still has 4 sides, whether you're dreaming of a square or looking at a real one. The laws of mathematics seem to survive the dream test.
But remember, Descartes is committed to radical doubt. He cannot stop at seems. He pushes his doubt past the dream state to its absolute agonizing limit.
And he does this with one of the most famous and chilling thought experiments in the history of human inquiry. He calls it the evil demon.
Yes. Descartes asks us to imagine a scenario where the universe is not governed by a benevolent God who wants us to know the truth. Instead, imagine there is a supremely powerful, utterly malicious, and infinitely clever evil genius, or demon.
Okay.
And this demon has dedicated all of its infinite cosmic energies to one single task: deceiving René Descartes.
Okay, let's unpack this evil demon concept because it honestly sounds like the plot of The Matrix written 300 years early.
It is the exact philosophical precursor to the Matrix. In this scenario, the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, all of it is just a sophisticated simulation, an illusion created by this demon to trap his mind.
So you think you are sitting in a chair listening to a deep dive? No. The demon is just feeding that sensory data directly into your consciousness.
And it gets worse. Even mathematics, the one thing that survived the dream test, could be a deception.
Wait, how could math be a lie? 2 plus 3 has to be 5.
Not if an omnipotent demon is altering your cognitive processes.
Oh, man.
Right. The demon could be manipulating your mind so that every single time you attempt to add 2 and 3, he chemically or spiritually forces you to arrive at the answer 5, even if the true objective answer in the real universe is something else entirely.
So every time you count the sides of a square, the demon makes you count 4.
Yeah,
Your own internal logic is being hijacked.
exactly.
If we accept that premise, if we step into that thought experiment even for a second, the vertigo is overwhelming.
It really is.
If this evil demon is controlling my reality and my logic, what can I possibly claim to know? I don't have a body. I don't have a past. The world doesn't exist. My memories are implanted. Math is a fabricated lie.
He has taken a bulldozer and stripped away literally everything in the universe.
He is floating in an endless, empty void of deception. Is there a single, tiny pebble of truth left in the rubble?
There is one thing.
What is it?
Descartes searches the absolute bottom of this abyss of doubt, and he strikes an impenetrable bedrock. One single, solitary, indestructible truth survives the demon. Descartes realizes that even if the demon is deceiving him about absolutely everything, even if his entire reality is a lie, there must be a him to be deceived.
The deceiver needs a target.
Precisely. If Descartes is doubting, he must be thinking. And if he is thinking, he must fundamentally exist as a thinking entity.
Right.
The demon can feed him false thoughts, but the demon cannot simulate the experiencer of those thoughts without actually creating an experiencer.
Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I mean, it is probably the most famous 3-word phrase in philosophy, but in this context, you really feel the weight of it. It's a survival mechanism.
It is the Archimedean point of his entire philosophy. Give me a place to stand, Archimedes said, and I will move the earth. The cogito is Descartes' place to stand.
So the evil demon can trick him into thinking he has hands when he doesn't.
Right. Or that the sky is blue when it isn't. But the demon cannot trick him into thinking he exists if he does not exist. The very act of being deceived is absolute proof of his existence as a thinking thing.
So the detonation is complete. The dust settles. Descartes is standing entirely alone in the void. He knows exactly one thing. He exists as a thinking thing. That's it.
And from this single, microscopic, undeniably true point, his new mission is to rebuild the entire universe.
But how do you build a universe when you don't even know if you have hands?
Well, he starts by looking inward. He begins categorizing the contents of his own mind, analyzing the ideas floating around in his consciousness, and he divides all human ideas into 3 distinct categories.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first category he identifies are adventitious ideas.
Adventitious, okay.
Yeah. These are the ideas that, at least upon first glance, appear to come from the outside world, transmitted through our senses, the feeling of heat radiating from a fire, the vibrant color of an apple, the loud ringing of a church bell.
Okay, sensory stuff. And the second category are factitious ideas. These are the fictions.
Right, the inventions.
The ideas our minds actively invent and construct. We take fragmented pieces of things we know and mash them together using our imagination. You know what a horse looks like. You know what a horn looks like. You match them together, you get a unicorn.
Or, to use Descartes' specific example, a hippogriff. You know, a mythical creature that's half horse, half eagle. Your mind is the author of factitious ideas.
Which brings us to the third category, and this is the absolute crucial linchpin for the entire rationalist project. Descartes calls these innate ideas.
Yes. Innate ideas. And these are ideas that are emphatically not derived from external sensory experience.
Okay.
Nor are they invented or mashed together by our imagination. According to Descartes, these ideas are hardwired into the very structure of the human mind from the moment of creation. They are placed there by God.
Wait, what kind of ideas get VIP status as innate?
The foundational concepts of reality. Mathematical truths, the laws of logic, the concept of absolute perfection, and crucially for Descartes' system, the concept of God himself. Descartes argues that we are born with these concepts preloaded.
I can hear the listener's skepticism flaring up right now. Like, why do we have to rely on these invisible, theoretical, innate concepts rather than just trusting our physical senses, which feels so much more real?
Well, Descartes anticipates this resistance, actually, and he gives us an incredibly vivid, tactile thought experiment to prove that the senses are utterly useless for grasping true reality. It's known as the wax argument.
Oh, the wax argument. This is a masterclass in philosophical deduction.
It really is. Descartes asks us to imagine a piece of honeycomb wax, fresh from the hive. He invites us to observe it using every single one of our senses.
Okay, let's do it. If I hold that fresh wax, it has a very specific set of sensory qualities.
Right.
If I bring it to my nose, I can smell the lingering sweetness of the honey and the pollen. I can look at it and see its distinct yellowish opaque color and its solid irregular shape. It feels hard and slightly cold to the touch. If I tap it against the wooden table, it makes a dull, solid, distinct sound.
So Every single one of your five senses is actively transmitting data to your brain, screaming, "This is a piece of wax."
The sensory profile is complete. But then Descartes introduces a change in the environment. He asks us to take that exact same piece of wax and move it close to a blazing fire.
And the environment acts on the object.
Right. The sweet smell of honey completely evaporates. The rigid shape begins to melt, droop, and lose its form.
The opaque yellow color shifts, becoming clear and translucent.
It ceases to be hard and becomes a liquid puddle, and it warms up so much that if I touch it, it burns my finger. If I try to tap it against the table now, it makes absolutely no sound, it just splashes.
Every single sensory quality that you relied on just moments ago to identify the wax has been completely obliterated.
The entire sensory profile has been swapped out for a new one.
And this physical transformation forces an incredibly important philosophical question. After all of those changes, do we still judge that puddle of hot liquid to be the same piece of wax?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, no sane person would argue that the original wax vanished out of existence and was replaced by a completely different object called liquid puddle.
Right.
We all inherently know it's the exact same substance, just in a different state.
But the rationalist trap snaps shut right there. How do you know that? By what mechanism do you grasp that identity? It mathematically cannot be your senses that tell you it's the same wax. Your senses operate on data, and every single piece of data changed.
Wow. Yeah.
The smell, the sight, the touch, the sound, none of the original information remains. If you were a purely empirical creature, relying solely on your senses, you would be forced to conclude that the first object ceased to exist, and a second, unrelated object appeared.
The senses cannot track identity across total transformation.
Exactly.
That is a staggering realization. If my eyes and hands can't tell me it's the same wax, what is doing the work? I mean, maybe it's my imagination. Like, my imagination can sort of animate the melting process in my mind's eye to bridge the gap.
Descartes aggressively rules out the imagination as well.
Why?
Think about the nature of melting wax. It can take on an infinite number of shapes. It could become a perfectly flat puddle, a jagged sphere, an asymmetrical blob, a long, thin line. Your human imagination is finite. It is literally impossible for your mind to picture the infinite array of possible geometric forms that wax might take.
I see.
Therefore, your imagination lacks the capacity to be the faculty that grasps the enduring, infinite potential of the wax's identity.
Okay, so the senses are blind to the change. The imagination is too weak to process the infinity. What is left to do the heavy lifting?
The intellect. Pure, unadulterated reason. Descartes concludes that it is the rational mind alone that steps in. The intellect strips away the changing, deceptive sensory clothes of the wax, like the smell, the color, the hardness.
And it grasps its true, invisible essence.
Exactly. And what is that essence? That it is an extended, flexible, mutable, physical substance occupying space.
So we don't actually see the wax with our biological eyes.
No. We judge it to be wax with our understanding. The eyes only see color and shape. The mind grasps wax.
Therefore, Descartes argues, the rational intellect is the true, superior instrument of knowledge, not the easily fooled, superficial senses.
Exactly.
I follow the logic of the wax. It's brilliant. But I want to pause here because I need to push back on Descartes. This feels like a magic trick.
How so?
Let's look back at his categories of ideas. He claims that the idea of God, or the concept of absolute infinity, is an innate idea, placed there by a creator untouched by the senses.
Right.
But if I close my eyes right now and imagine his hippogriff, what am I actually doing? I am mashing together adventitious sensory experiences. I've seen a horse in a field. I've seen an eagle in the sky. My brain just takes those sensory Lego bricks and snaps them together.
A very empiricist way of looking at the mind.
Exactly. So how does Descartes prove that any idea is truly innate? Why can't I use the Lego brick method for God?
Okay, let's hear it.
Couldn't the idea of an infinite, perfect God just be me taking the concept of a finite human, someone who has a little bit of power, a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of goodness, and using my imagination to hit the multiply button over and over until it reaches infinity?
Right, right.
Why do I need God to plant the idea of God in my head when my imagination can just scale up a human being?
Well, you are anticipating the exact counteroffensive that the empiricists would launch decades later. It's a very natural objection. But Descartes built a specific defensive wall for this exact attack.
What is it?
It is often referred to in philosophy as the poverty of stimulus argument, or his causal argument for God. Descartes anchors his defense in a widely accepted metaphysical principle of his time, There must be at least as much reality or perfection in the cause of an idea as there is in the effect, the idea itself.
Okay, translating that from 17th century metaphysics, meaning what?
Meaning a lesser thing cannot generate a greater thing. Something with 10 degrees of perfection cannot create something with 100 degrees of perfection.
I follow.
Now, Descartes looks at his own mind. He has just spent the last week doubting everything. He knows intimately that he is a finite, imperfect, highly flawed creature. Yet, hovering right there in his flawed mind, he finds the clear and distinct idea of a supremely perfect, absolute, infinite being.
And he thinks his flawed mind couldn't have generated that perfect idea.
Exactly. He argues that a finite, imperfect being could never, using its own limited resources, construct the true idea of absolute infinity. Your Lego brick analogy breaks down, according to Descartes, when you try to build infinity.
Why?
Because no matter how many finite sensory experiences you stack together, no matter how many times you hit multiply on your human traits, you will never actually reach true absolute infinity. You will only reach a very, very large finite number.
An indefinite largeness.
Yes. But you, the listener, actually comprehend the concept of true infinity. Where did you get it? The stimulus, your limited, finite life experience, is too completely impoverished to generate that concept.
Oh, I see the trap. Because I am fundamentally imperfect and finite, the very fact that I can even comprehend the concept of true, absolute perfection and infinity means that the concept had to be imported.
Right.
It had to be planted in my mind from the outside by a being that actually possesses infinite perfection.
Precisely. The effect, the idea of infinity, is so great that it requires a genuinely infinite cause. Therefore, the idea of God cannot be a factitious mashup. It must be hardwired into us from the start. Descartes calls it the signature of the Creator left upon his handiwork.
And once he proves God exists, he uses God's benevolence to prove the evil demon isn't real, which allows him to trust his intellect, which allows him to slowly rebuild the physical universe.
That is the rationalist fortress.
It is a breathtaking architectural achievement of the mind. Knowledge isn't gathered from the dirt. It is built on undeniable, mathematically tight deductions from innate ideas, starting with the self, moving upward to God, and finally cascading downward to secure the reality of the physical world.
It is beautiful. It is elegant. Descartes really believed he had solved the fundamental puzzle of philosophy forever. He locked the doors of his fortress and rested.
But of course, the history of ideas is never that peaceful.
Never.
A few decades pass. Across the English Channel, a new generation of thinkers reads Descartes' work. They admire the towering spires of his fortress, they respect the mathematical precision of the Cogito, and then they decide to wheel out the philosophical canons.
Oh, they definitely do.
They look at the foundation of the fortress and ask a devastatingly practical question. Descartes, where is the actual observable evidence for these so-called innate ideas?
Which brings us out of the mind of Descartes and into the world of John Locke. The transition from Descartes to Locke is a huge shift from the theoretical to the empirical. In 1690, the English philosopher John Locke publishes a massive, groundbreaking work titled An Essay Concerning Human Understanding.
And Locke isn't a mathematician like Descartes, right? He is a physician.
Yes. He has a medical observational mindset, and his primary critique of the rationalist fortress is rooted in biology and anthropology. He looks at Descartes' core claim that complex ideas like mathematical axioms, logical laws, and the concept of God are innate, pre-installed into the human soul before birth.
And what does Locke say?
Locke says, okay, if that is a biological fact, then we should expect to see universal agreement on these ideas across the entire human species.
It's a totally testable hypothesis. I mean, if we were all born with the concept of God and the laws of geometry already loaded on our internal hard drives, then every single human being, regardless of where or when they're born, should automatically boot up with that knowledge.
Exactly. It should be inescapable. But Locke points out the empirical reality. Have you ever tried to discuss geometry with a newborn infant?
I can't say that I have.
They don't know it. They don't act like they know it. What about individuals with severe cognitive impairments? Do they inherently grasp complex theological concepts? No.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, Locke points to the explosion of global exploration happening in his era. When Europeans encountered indigenous cultures across the globe, they didn't find universal consent. They found vastly different moral systems, entirely different concepts of deity, and in some cases, no recognizable concept of a monotheistic God at all.
Right. If the software was universally pre-installed, everyone would run the same programs. The fact that they don't proves the software isn't there.
Locke argues that there is absolutely no universal consent on any profound principle. Therefore, the rationalist premise fails the observational test. The innate operating system is a myth.
So, if Descartes' fortress is built on a myth, Locke has to provide a new foundation. If the mind is not a pre-programmed computer full of innate ideas, what is it?
Locke reaches for a famous metaphor. He says the mind at birth is a tabula rasa. It is a completely blank slate.
Or, as he beautifully phrased it in English, it is white paper, void of all characters.
Yes. When you are born, there is not a single word, equation, or concept written on your mind. You are profoundly empty.
The blank slate is the foundational doctrine of empiricism. But immediately, this presents Locke with a massive explanatory burden.
So?
Well, if the mind is completely blank at birth, an empty white room, how does it eventually become furnished with the incredible complex, nuanced, abstract ideas we all possess as adults? How do you get from a blank piece of paper to the theory of relativity or the concept of justice?
Locke's answer is brilliantly streamlined. He says the ink that writes on the white paper comes from one source and one source only: experience.
I think he categorizes that experience into two distinct pipelines: sensation and reflection. Let's break those pipelines down because this is the mechanics of how we learn everything.
Okay, the first pipeline is sensation.
This seems like the obvious one. It's our 5 biological senses physically interacting with the external world.
Right. Sensation is the primary point of contact. Through sensation, the external world forces simple ideas into the blank mind. These simple ideas are the atomic building blocks of all thought. The vivid redness of an apple, the sharp, piercing cold of winter ice, the cloying sweetness of sugar.
Why does he call them simple?
Because they cannot be broken down or analyzed into any smaller component parts. You cannot explain red to a blind person. It is a fundamental, irreducible unit of experience.
And crucially, the mind is completely, utterly passive in receiving these simple ideas, right?
Yes. When you open your eyes and look at a ripe tomato in bright sunlight, you cannot choose not to see the color red. The sensory data is forced upon your mind's white paper.
The outside world is stamping these simple ideas onto the slate. Now, what about the second pipeline? Reflection.
We have to be careful here because when we say reflection, we usually mean looking in a mirror or maybe pondering a memory.
Right.
But Locke means something very specific mechanically. Locke uses reflection to describe the mind turning its observational power inward to watch its own internal operations.
Okay, so it's watching itself.
As the mind begins to receive and process all those simple sensory inputs, the reds, the colds, the louds, it performs actions on them. It thinks about them. It doubts them. It believes them. It desires them. It remembers them.
So the mind is acting like a software program, processing data.
Exactly. And our internal awareness of these mental operations provides us with a second set of simple ideas. The idea of perception, the idea of willing, the idea of memory, these don't come from touching a rock. They come from feeling yourself think.
So the blank slate is populated by simple ideas of sensation from the outside and simple ideas of reflection from the inside.
Yes.
This makes logical sense for basic concepts. I see a blue block, I get the simple idea of blue. But I am an adult human, and my mind is full of ideas that are vastly more complicated than just blue or thinking. I have the idea of a commercial jetliner. I have the idea of a democratic republic. I have the idea of a golden mountain.
Right.
I've never seen a golden mountain in the real world. So how do I get that idea on my blank slate if experience is the only ink?
This is where Locke introduces the active power of the mind. While the mind is strictly passive when receiving simple ideas, it becomes a dynamic, creative factory once those raw materials are inside.
Okay.
The mind possesses the ability to take those simple ideas and perform operations on them. It can combine them, compare them, and abstract from them to build complex ideas.
Ah, the Lego bricks return.
Exactly, the empiricist Lego bricks. Your concept of a golden mountain isn't a mystical, innate idea. It is just the mind acting as a factory.
So it takes the simple idea of gold, which you acquired through the sensation of seeing a ring or a coin.
Right. And the simple idea of mountain, which you acquired through the sensation of seeing a landscape. The mind takes those two empirically sourced simple ideas and actively glues them together.
You didn't need God to give you the idea of a golden mountain. You just needed eyes to see gold, eyes to see a mountain, and a brain capable of combination.
Yes. Locke argues that every single concept, no matter how abstract, even the concept of infinity, can be reverse engineered and broken down into simple ideas of sensation and reflection.
Locke is building a very persuasive, grounded case here. It feels much more scientific than Descartes' demon. But Locke is walking into a massive philosophical trap.
He really is.
If he claims that absolutely all our knowledge comes through our senses, he has to answer the exact problem Descartes used to destroy the senses in the first place.
The wax.
Right. How do we know our senses are actually giving us an accurate picture of the physical reality out there? Descartes already proved with the melting wax that our senses constantly change, lie, and deceive us. If Locke's entire system relies on the senses, how does he save science from collapsing into total skepticism?
Well, this was the existential threat to empiricism. Locke knows he has to deal with the stick in the water and the melting wax. He does it by executing a brilliant, though highly debated, maneuver.
What's the maneuver?
He makes a strict philosophical distinction between what he categorizes as the primary and secondary qualities of objects. Locke realizes he has to concede a little ground to Descartes. He has to admit that some of our sensory experiences are purely subjective. But he fiercely defends a core set of objective properties to rescue the physical, measurable universe for the scientists like Isaac Newton.
Let's ground this in a physical object so the listener can track the mechanics. I am holding a ripe, garden-grown tomato in my hand.
Good example.
It is vibrant red. It smells a little earthy and green near the stem. It feels smooth and slightly yielding to the touch. If I bite into it, it tastes highly acidic and sweet. Every sense is firing. According to Locke, are all of those qualities, the red, the sweet, the smooth, actually existing inside the physical matter of the tomato?
According to Locke, absolutely not. The tomato as it exists in the universe is not what you think it is. Locke divides the qualities you just listed. First, we establish the primary qualities.
Primary qualities, got it.
These are the fundamental, inescapable characteristics that exist entirely independently of any biological perceiver. They belong inextricably to the physical object itself. You cannot separate a primary quality from a body.
What are they for the tomato?
Its physical mass, its specific spatial dimensions, its shape, its location in three-dimensional space, its state of motion or rest.
Okay.
Locke's argument is that even if every single human being on Earth went blind, deaf, and numb tomorrow, that tomato would still possess that exact mass, that exact spherical shape, and occupy that exact space. The primary qualities are mathematically objective reality.
Okay, the shape is real, but what about the redness? What about the sharp, acidic taste?
Locke categorizes those as secondary qualities. Color, smell, taste, sound, and the feeling of hot and cold. Locke argues a radical point. These qualities do not exist in the objects themselves.
Wait, there is no such physical property as redness or sweetness floating around inside the tomato's atoms?
No, secondary qualities are nothing more than the invisible powers that the primary qualities of the object have to produce sensations in your mind.
Walk me through that mechanics.
The tomato has a specific microscopic atomic structure, which is a primary quality. That physical structure reflects light waves in a very specific physical pattern. Those light waves, which have no color themselves, hit your retina.
Right.
Your optical nerve sends a signal to your brain, and your brain, your mind, internally generates the subjective experience of red. The redness is an event happening exclusively inside your consciousness. The sweetness is an event happening inside your consciousness.
The tomato itself is colorless, tasteless, and silent.
Exactly.
So, if I am understanding Locke correctly, he is essentially saying the objective physical universe, the real reality out there, is like a black and white silent movie.
Right.
It consists of absolutely nothing but primary qualities. Invisible masses, shapes, and atomic structures silently floating and colliding in the void of space. And our biological minds are the movie projectors.
Wow.
We take in that silent, colorless data, and our brains artificially paint on the color, pump in the smells, and add the soundtrack of secondary qualities to make it a livable experience.
That is a phenomenal, precise analogy, yes.
Yeah.
The universe is a silent movie, and your brain is the post-production studio adding the sensory effects. And this elegant division is how Locke answers the skeptic and saves science.
How so?
He says to Descartes, "You are right. The senses can deceive us about colors and tastes. If I have a cold, the tomato tastes like nothing. The secondary qualities are subjective, and we shouldn't build our science on them."
That makes sense.
But Locke insists we absolutely can trust our mathematical measurements of the primary qualities, the mass, the dimensions, the motion. This provides a rock-solid, secure, philosophical foundation for the empirical sciences of physics and chemistry that were exploding during the Enlightenment.
It's a very neat pragmatic categorization. It feels like a workable compromise.
Yeah.
And Locke seems generally much more pragmatic than Descartes. I mean, he doesn't demand 100% absolute mathematical certainty for every single thought in his head, does he? He categorizes our certainty of knowledge into degrees.
Correct. Locke introduces a vital dose of humility to philosophy. He recognizes the biological limits of human understanding. He says it is arrogant to expect absolute certainty for everything.
So what are his degrees?
He divides our knowledge into 3 distinct degrees of certainty. The highest, most pristine level is intuitive knowledge. This is immediate, undeniable, flashing certainty. It is when the mind perceives the agreement or disagreement of 2 ideas immediately by themselves without the intervention of any other.
Give me an example of intuitive knowledge.
Knowing that white is not black, knowing that a circle is not a triangle, or, nodding to Descartes, knowing that you yourself exist. You don't need a multi-step proof to know white isn't black. You just perceive it instantly. The mind sees the truth as clearly as the eye sees the sun.
But intuition only covers very basic things. We need to know more complex truths. So what is the second degree?
The second degree is demonstrative knowledge. This occurs when the mind cannot immediately see the connection between 2 ideas, so it has to use intermediate ideas, proofs, to connect them. This is the realm of mathematics and logic.
Like a geometric proof.
Exactly. If you want to prove that the interior angles of a triangle equal 2 right angles, you can't just intuit it in a flash. You have to walk through a series of logical steps. Now, Locke says each individual step must be intuitively certain, but because it relies on a chain of reasoning and memory, demonstrative knowledge is slightly less perfect than intuitive knowledge.
You can make a mistake in the chain.
Right. Interestingly, Locke firmly believed we could know that God exists through this kind of demonstrative, logical reasoning.
Okay, so we have intuition for the basics, demonstration for math and God. But neither of those helps me navigate the physical universe. The third degree seems to be the most relevant to his entire empiricist project.
Yes, the third degree is sensitive knowledge. And this is our knowledge of the external physical world. And here is where Locke, to his credit, draws a very strict, philosophically honest boundary.
What's the boundary?
He says we only have sensitive knowledge that an external object exists while we are actively currently perceiving it with our senses.
Explain the limits of that. If I'm looking right now at the coffee mug on my desk, Locke says I have sensitive knowledge it exists.
Yes. The sensory data is actively hitting your retina. You know it is there. But the moment you stand up, turn your back, and walk out of the room, you no longer know the coffee mug exists.
That sounds absurd. Of course I know it's there. I just left it there.
You assume it is there. You believe it is highly probable it is there. But strictly speaking philosophically, because the sensory connection has been broken, it ceases to be a certain knowledge. A dog could have knocked it over. A thief could have stolen it. A localized earthquake could have shattered it.
So Locke is admitting that our knowledge of the physical world is tethered entirely to the present moment of sensory input.
Yes.
Locke thought he had threaded the needle. He saved the physical world, he gave science a rulebook of primary qualities, and he banished the mystical innate ideas. But by admitting that our knowledge of the external world is strictly limited to our immediate sensory impressions, he inadvertently left the back door of the empiricist house wide open.
Wide open.
He established the rule, all knowledge comes only from experience. But he didn't apply that rule ruthlessly enough. What happens when a philosopher comes along, reads Locke's rule, and decides to aggressively, mercilessly apply it to absolutely everything, including the foundations of science itself?
What happens is an intellectual bloodbath. The philosopher who walks through that open door is David Hume. And under his interrogation, empiricism gets pushed to the absolute, terrifying brink of total paralyzing skepticism.
We are entering the domain of David Hume, the brilliant, genial, and utterly destructive Scottish Enlightened philosopher. Hume reads John Locke. He completely agrees with the empiricist foundation, the blank slate, the necessity of experience.
Right.
But Hume looks at Locke's system and realizes Locke held back. Locke still believed in God, in a permanent self, in scientific certainty. Hume wants to clean house. If we're going to be empiricists, Hume says, let's be absolute, unsparing empiricists.
Hume begins his demolition by tightening and refining Locke's terminology. Locke vaguely referred to everything in the mind as ideas. Hume needs a sharper scalpel. He introduces the blanket term perceptions to cover absolutely any mental activity. And he divides all human perceptions into 2 strict categories based on their force and vivacity: impressions and ideas.
This distinction is crucial. Let's define impressions first. These are the live feeds, right?
Exactly. Impressions are our immediate, vivid, raw sensory experiences and internal emotions as they are happening in real time. It is the blinding, painful brightness of looking directly at the sun. It is the searing physical pain of burning your hand on a stove.
Or the overwhelming physical rush of intense anger. Impressions strike the mind with maximum force and violence.
Yes.
And what are ideas?
Ideas are the pale, faint, decaying memories or copies of those original impressions. When you sit in a dark room later that night and remember looking at the sun, or when you recall the feeling of being angry yesterday, you are experiencing an idea.
It lacks the force, the vivacity, the raw voltage of the original impression.
Right. Which leads to Hume's ultimate weapon, which he calls the copy principle.
The copy principle is the guillotine of Hume's philosophy.
It really is. It states a relentless rule. Every single genuine, meaningful idea in your mind must be a direct, traceable copy of a preceding impression. If you cannot trace a complex idea back to a raw sensory or emotional impression, then that idea is meaningless.
He uses this as a sorting mechanism for nonsense.
Precisely. If a theologian or a philosopher starts talking about a grand abstract concept, Hume demands that they produce the original sensory impression that the concept was copied from. If they can't produce the sensory impression, Hume declares the concept to be empty, metaphysical garbage. It's an illusion of language.
To help sort the garbage from the truth, he develops an analytical tool that philosophers fondly refer to as Hume's fork. It's a way of dividing all human thought into two mutually exclusive paths. He says every single proposition we can ever think about falls onto one of two tines of this fork.
Let's look at tine number 1, relations of ideas.
Okay, relations of ideas.
These encompass the realms of geometry, algebra, and pure logic. These are statements whose absolute truth is guaranteed solely by the meanings of the terms themselves. The classic example is, all bachelors are unmarried, or 2 + 2 = 4.
How do I know those are true without sensory impressions?
Because you can know them with 100% certainty purely by examining the concepts in your mind, without ever needing to look at the outside world. The definition of bachelor inextricably contains the concept of unmarried. Furthermore, the defining characteristic of a relation of ideas is that its denial creates an impossible logical contradiction.
Right. You literally cannot conceive of a married bachelor. The mind rejects the very phrasing. It's a square circle.
Exactly. So, relations of ideas offer perfect mathematical certainty, but Hume points out the devastating catch. Because they are true merely by definition, they tell us absolutely nothing about what actually exists in the real physical universe. All bachelors are unmarried is true, but it doesn't tell you if a single bachelor actually exists on planet Earth.
They are empty, abstract, logical structures. So if I want to actually talk about the real world, the physical universe I live in, I can't use relations of ideas. I have to shift over to tie number 2 of Hume's fork, which is matters of fact.
Matters of fact deal exclusively with the empirical physical world. These are statements like, the sun will rise tomorrow, fire is hot, if I push this glass off the table, it will fall to the floor. Now, here is the crucial world-shattering difference that Hume highlights. The denial of a matter of fact is never a logical contradiction.
Walk me through that. What do you mean it's not a contradiction?
You cannot imagine a married bachelor, but can you imagine a world where you push a glass off the table and instead of falling down, it floats up to the ceiling?
Sure, I can easily visualize that. It looks like being in zero gravity.
Can you imagine waking up tomorrow and the sun simply doesn't rise and the sky stays dark?
Yes, I can easily picture a dark morning.
Exactly. Imagining those scenarios doesn't break any laws of logic. It breaks the laws of physics as we currently understand them, but it is not a logical contradiction like a square circle. And because the contrary of a matter of fact is always logically possible, Hume concludes that we can never, ever prove matters of fact with the absolute 100% deductive certainty of mathematics.
We only believe them based on our past sensory experience.
Right.
And this is where Hume takes his empiricist laser beam and aims it directly at the heart of science, physics, and our entire daily existence. He aims it at the concept of causation, cause and effect, the idea that event A forces event B to happen.
Causation is the glue that holds the universe together. It's the basis of all science. We believe that heating water causes it to boil. We believe that gravity causes the glass to fall. Hume says, let's submit causation to the copy principle. Where is the sensory impression of causation?
Let's walk through Hume's famous billiard ball example, because it perfectly illustrates the horror of his logic. Imagine we are standing over a green felt pool table. I take a pool cue, and I strike the white cue ball. Okay. The white ball rolls across the felt. That is event A. It approaches a stationary red ball. It strikes the red ball. We hear a sharp clack. The red ball immediately accelerates and rolls away across the table. That is event B. Now, any normal human being watches that sequence, and their brain instantly concludes the white ball caused the red ball to move. The force transferred from one to the other.
We feel like we physically saw causation happen.
But Hume says, stop, freeze the frame, rewind the tape, apply the strict empiricist copy principle. What actual distinct sensory impressions did your eyes and ears receive?
Well, you had a visual impression of the white ball moving across space. You had a visual and auditory impression of the two physical spheres touching and making a sound. And then you had a visual impression of the red ball moving across space.
I observed a chronological sequence of events. Event A happened, and immediately contiguous in space and time, event B happened.
But here's the fatal question. Did you ever, at any point, actually see, hear, or feel a physical entity called force or necessary connection transferring from the white ball to the red ball? Did you perceive the cause itself?
No. I just saw one thing happen and then another thing happened. I saw the movement, but I didn't see the invisible chain linking them together.
Precisely. You never experience the cause itself. You never experience the necessity. You only ever experience what Hume calls constant conjunction. Event A is always followed by event B in your historical experience.
But Hume argues, brilliantly and terrifyingly, that because you have seen the sequence happen 100 times, your biological mind develops a psychological habit.
Yes, you become conditioned, like Pavlov's dog, to expect event B the moment you see event A.
So causation isn't real.
Hume argues that causation is not an objective perceivable feature of the physical universe. It is a psychological feeling of expectation generated internally by our own minds due to custom and habit. We project our internal expectation onto the external world and call it cause.
If causation is just a psychological habit, an expectation, and not a proven, mathematically secure, rational fact, then we run headfirst into a massive brick wall called the problem of induction.
Yes. Induction is the logical process of using past experiences to make generalized predictions about the future. The entirety of science relies on induction. Every single time in human history we have boiled water, it has turned to steam.
Therefore, scientists predict with extreme confidence that the next time we boil water, it will turn to steam. We assume that the future will resemble the past. We assume nature is uniform.
But Hume asks the lethal question, how can you rationally, philosophically justify that assumption? How do you know the future will resemble the past?
Let's try to prove it. You can't use tie number one, relations of ideas, to prove it, because there's no logical contradiction in imagining that tomorrow water will suddenly freeze when you put it on a hot stove. The universe could change its rules overnight.
So you have to use tie number two, matters of fact, to prove it. You have to appeal to your experience.
So I stand up and I say to Hume, I know the future will resemble the past because, in my vast past experience, the future has always resembled the past. The sun has always risen, so it will rise again.
And Hume springs the final trap. He smiles and points out that you just use circular reasoning.
Right.
You are using induction to prove the validity of induction. You are assuming the very thing you are trying to logically prove, that nature's patterns hold steady. Just because the sun has risen every single day for 4 billion years, there is absolutely zero rational, logical proof that it will rise tomorrow morning. It is entirely possible it won't.
If I am really absorbing what Hume is saying here, it is profoundly paralyzing. If I hold my coffee mug out at arm's length right now and I open my fingers, Hume is saying I don't technically know it will fall to the floor.
That's what he's saying.
I just have an intense psychological habit of expecting it to fall based on past constant conjunction. I can't scientifically prove gravity will work in the next 10 seconds. Isn't that a totally impossible way to live? How can we do science? How can we even cross the street if we can't prove that an oncoming bus will cause us physical harm?
It is deeply unsettling. It is the abyss of skepticism. And Hume himself fully recognized the psychological terror of his own conclusions. He reached a state we might call a skeptical threshold. He admitted that if you follow the rules of empiricism down to their absolute, rigorous, logical bedrock, human beings have absolutely zero rational justification for our beliefs about cause and effect or our predictions about the future. From a purely logical standpoint, our knowledge is strictly confined to our present immediate sensory impressions and our fading memories of past ones. We know nothing of the future. Nothing.
But Hume didn't just sit in a dark room, paralyzed by doubt, refusing to eat because he couldn't prove bread would nourish him, did he? How did he cope with his own philosophy?
He coped by realizing the limits of philosophy itself. Hume famously noted that while pure reason is completely incapable of justifying our beliefs about the world, nature is too strong for principle. We are first and foremost biological creatures. We are psychologically compelled by our biology to act and believe.
So we just ignore the logic to survive?
Yes. Custom and habit, Hume says, are the great guides of human life. Reason may be completely silent, it may offer no guarantees, but our psychological habits allow us to navigate the world and survive.
We expect the coffee mug to fall. We expect the bread to digest and nourish us. We jump out of the way of the bus, not because we have proven it logically, but because our animal minds are wired by habit to expect it. We act on probability and biological custom, not on rational certainty.
Hume embraces this. He says, be a philosopher, but amidst all your philosophy, be still a man. Go play backgammon, dine with your friends, and let nature take over.
So let's survey the battlefield. Locke tried to save the physical world with primary qualities, but Hume stripped away the glue of cause and effect, holding that world together, leaving us acting purely on blind animal habit, hoping the sun rises tomorrow. The empiricists had dragged human knowledge to the edge of a cliff.
But the rationalists weren't dead yet.
They were watching this happen. Over in Germany, a brilliant, eccentric polymath named Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz gets his hands on Locke's essay concerning human understanding.
Yes, Leibniz.
Leibniz reads the Empiricist manifesto, sees the danger of the blank slate, and decides it requires a massive, exhaustive, chapter-by-chapter rebuttal.
Leibniz is a fascinating figure. He co-invented calculus alongside Newton, he was a diplomat, and a fierce defender of rationalism. He writes a massive book called New Essays on Human Understanding. He finishes it around 1704, though due to Locke's death, he delayed its publication out of respect.
And instead of writing a dry, standard philosophical treatise outlining his disagreements, Leibniz makes a brilliant stylistic choice. He frames the entire book as a dialogue.
A conversation between two fictional characters.
Exactly. He creates Philalethes, who acts as the proxy for Locke, often quoting Locke's empiricist arguments almost verbatim. And he creates Theophilus, who represents Leibniz's own voice, delivering the rationalist counter-arguments in real time.
It's a fantastic format because it actually feels like a living debate.
And what I love about Leibniz is that he goes on these incredible, seemingly quirky tangents to prove his point about the power of the intellect over the senses. My favorite part is where the characters legitimately discuss whether human beings should provisionally baptize highly intelligent aliens found on the moon.
I know it sounds completely absurd, like 17th century science fiction, but Leibniz is actually making a profound and highly serious philosophical point about how we identify the true nature of things. Well, Locke, the empiricist, had argued that human beings can only ever know the nominal essence of objects. We group things together based on outward, observable sensory properties. We see a creature with 2 legs, no feathers, and the ability to speak, and we give it the name human. But Locke said we can never know the real essence, the deep, invisible atomic structure of the thing.
And Leibniz vehemently disagrees with that limitation.
Yes. Leibniz counters that the rational intellect can pierce through the sensory data and identify the true, necessary metaphysical essence of a thing. He uses the moon alien thought experiment to prove it.
Right.
Imagine we travel to the moon and we find creatures that look absolutely nothing like us physically. Maybe they're gelatinous blobs or insectoid. Their sensory profile is entirely alien. If we relied solely on empiricism, we would say they are not human because they don't look human. But, Leibniz argues, what if through observation we discover that these creatures possess a rational soul? What if they demonstrate the capacity for complex reason, mathematics, and moral understanding? Reason dictates that the true core essence of humanity is not our physical shape, but our rational intellect.
Therefore, Leibniz argues, despite their bizarre physical sensory appearance, they share the true essence of humanity. And if they share our essence, theological prudence dictates we should probably baptize them just in case.
Exactly. It's a wild example, but it perfectly illustrates how much he prioritizes the invisible rational intellect over superficial physical sensory data. He also uses this dialogue format to tackle Molyneux's problem, which was a very famous, widely debated thought experiment at the time.
Molyneux's problem is one of the great puzzles of early psychology and philosophy. It goes like this. Imagine an adult man who has been completely blind since birth. Over the course of his life, he has learned to perfectly distinguish between a physical cube and a physical sphere made of the same metal, purely by touching them with his hands. He knows the sharp corners of the cube. He knows the smooth curvature of the sphere.
Okay, so he has tactile knowledge.
Now imagine a miraculous medical procedure suddenly restores his sight. Before he is allowed to touch the objects again, the cube and the sphere are placed on a table in front of him. Purely by looking at them with his brand new visual sense, without reaching out to feel them, could this man tell you which object is the cube and which is the sphere?
How did the empiricists answer?
The strict empiricists generally argue no, he could not. Their logic was that his visual sensory data is brand new. His mind has never established a connection between the visual simple idea of a corner and the tactile simple idea of a corner. They are separate empirical inputs. He would have to reach out, touch the cube while looking at it, and actively build that association through experience.
But Leibniz, defending the rationalist fortress, says yes, he absolutely could tell them apart immediately. Why?
Because Leibniz argues that the mathematical structural ideas of a cube and a sphere, their geometry, their corners, their uniform curvature, are not purely visual, nor are they purely tactile. They are universal structural truths grasped by the central intellect.
Ah.
The blind man's rational intellect already perfectly understands the underlying geometry of the cube from his tactile experience. When his eyes open and he sees the sharp intersecting lines visually, his intellect will immediately recognize the exact same geometric structure. The ideas of geometry reside in the reason, not localized in the sense organs.
Leibniz is using every weapon he has to attack Locke's concept of the tabula rasa. He completely rejects the idea that the mind is a passive, blank white paper waiting to be written on. He argues that the senses, by their very nature, can only ever give us particular truths.
Right. They can really give us isolated instances of things happening right now.
Exactly. But the senses can never, ever give us necessary or universal truths. That is the core of his critique. You can observe the sun rising 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times. That is a vast collection of particular truths.
But, as Hume so brutally pointed out, sensory observation alone cannot prove that the sun must necessarily rise tomorrow.
Yes. Our knowledge of necessary truths, like the laws of mathematics, logic, and geometry, must come from a source within the mind itself because the physical world of experience can't guarantee necessity.
Leibniz also challenges Locke's biological model of the mind. Locke seemed to believe that if you have a perception in your mind, you must be consciously aware of it. If nothing is actively happening, the slate is blank. Leibniz introduces a revolutionary psychological concept to counter this: minute perceptions.
This is where Leibniz anticipates modern psychology by centuries. He argues that the mind never stops thinking. It is never blank, and it is never entirely silent. Even when you think your mind is clear, it is constantly receiving and processing a massive, chaotic barrage of tiny, unconscious perceptions that are too small for us to consciously register.
He used an amazing analogy for this: the sound of the ocean. Imagine you are standing on a beach and you hear the massive, deafening roar of the ocean waves crashing against the shore. You are consciously aware of that singular loud roar, but physically, what is that roar made of? It is composed of millions upon millions of tiny individual sounds, the sound of every single microscopic drop of water colliding with another drop of water.
Exactly. You aren't consciously aware of the sound of one single drop of water hitting the beach. It's too quiet. But, Leibniz argues, all those millions of minute perceptions of single drops must be registering in your mind on some unconscious level, because if they weren't, they could never combine to form the conscious roar that you do hear. 0 plus 0 plus 0 cannot equal a roar.
So the mind is a bustling, incredibly loud hub of constant unconscious activity. It is mathematically impossible for it to be a passive blank slate. It has its own internal dynamics, its own machinery churning away beneath the surface.
Because of this machinery, Leibniz offers his own metaphor to counter Locke's blank paper. He says the mind is not a blank slate. It is much more like a large block of heavily veined marble.
I love this analogy. If Locke says the mind is blank paper waiting for ink, Leibniz says it's marble. The sculptor, which represents our life experience, takes a chisel and chips away at the marble to reveal a statue. But the veins running deep inside the marble physically predetermine what kind of statue the marble naturally wants to become. It takes less effort to carve along the veins than against them.
A beautiful way to frame it. Or, to use another analogy, if Locke says the mind is an empty fireplace waiting for wood, Leibniz is saying the mind is a fireplace with warm embers already glowing softly under the ash, just waiting for the wind of sensory experience to fan them into a roaring fire.
What are those glowing embers exactly? Are they fully formed thoughts?
Leibniz calls them innate virtualities or natural dispositions. He modifies Descartes a bit here. The 8 ideas aren't sitting in the mind fully formed, like a printed book you just haven't bothered to open yet. Rather, the mind is inherently structured with innate capabilities, inclinations, and patterns that naturally guide us to discover necessary truths.
So experience acts as the trigger, the wind fanning the embers, but the capacity, the structure, and the shape of that knowledge were already woven into the mind.
Yes. He called this the pre-established harmony.
Pre-established harmony, right?
Well, Leibniz was a deeply religious and mathematical thinker. He believed the universe is fundamentally rational, ordered, and harmonious. God created both the physical external world and our internal mind simultaneously, and he engineered a pre-established harmony between them.
Our innate rational capabilities are perfectly tuned, like an instrument, to discover the rational truths that are woven into the physical fabric of the universe. Experience doesn't randomly write on the mind, it unlocks and actualizes what is already aligned within it.
So let's look at the state of philosophy by the late 18th century. We have a massive, seemingly unbreakable philosophical stalemate. It's a cold war of the mind.
On one side, the rationalists have built these magnificent, towering, incredibly complex metaphysical systems talking about God, infinity, monads, and pre-established harmony. But to many, it feels like ungrounded, airy speculation floating completely free of any observable empirical evidence.
And on the opposing side, the empiricists, culminating with the devastating logic of David Hume, have tethered human thought strictly to the ground of observation. But in doing so, they've ended up trapped in a skeptical pit where we can't even rationally prove cause and effect, potentially paralyzing the progress of Newtonian science.
Philosophy was completely stuck. It was a crisis of knowledge. And then, a meticulously punctual Prussian philosopher named Immanuel Kant sits down in his study and reads the works of David Hume. Kant later famously wrote that reading Hume interrupted his dogmatic slumber.
Kant was shaken to his core. He realized that Hume was absolutely right to attack the wild, unfounded metaphysical speculations of the rationalists. You can't just invent universes in your armchair.
Right.
But Kant also deeply understood that Hume's extreme empiricism destroyed the foundations of physics, which Kant knew, observationally and mathematically, to be incredibly successful and demonstrably true. Kant refuses to accept that science is just a psychological habit.
Kant realizes he has to undertake an impossible mission. He has to find a middle path. He has to rescue the absolute certainty of science from Hume's skeptical abyss. But he also has to pull philosophy back down to the physical earth from the rationalists' clouds.
And his revolutionary realization, the move that changes Western thought forever, is that both the rationalists and the empiricists are actually half right and tragically half wrong.
Kant fundamentally shifts the perspective of the entire debate. The rationalists operated on the assumption that the mind was primarily active and generated profound truths, largely independent of the physical world. The empiricists operated on the assumption that the mind was passive, merely a receptor receiving data from the world. Kant fuses them together. He says the mind is highly active, yes, but it absolutely requires physical sensory data to act upon.
He has a very famous poetic quote that summarizes this grand synthesis perfectly. Thoughts without content are empty. Intuitions without concepts are blind.
Let's translate that dense philosophical language into everyday terms. Thoughts, which are our rational concepts, our logic, our categories, without content, without the raw sensory data from the external world, are completely empty. You cannot just sit in a dark room, close your eyes, and logically deduce the existence of a kangaroo if you've never seen one. You need actual sensory input. The empiricists were right about that.
But on the flip side,
intuitions, which is Kant's specific term for raw, unfiltered sensory data, without concepts, without the mind's active, organizing, rational structure, are completely blind. Raw sensory data, just a blast of light noise, is just a chaotic, buzzing, ballooning confusion.
It means nothing unless the rational mind actively steps in to organize, categorize, and structure it. The rationalists were right about the mind's active architecture.
To map out exactly how this synthesis works, to show us the machinery of how the mind formats reality, Kant creates an incredibly rigorous grid system to categorize every single piece of human knowledge. He splits knowledge along 2 different axes. Let's walk through this slowly, because this is the key to unlocking reality.
Sounds good.
First, he looks at how a statement is true regarding its subject and predicate. He divides all statements into analytic and synthetic.
Let's start with an analytic judgment. This is a statement that is true purely and simply by definition. The predicate is already secretly contained within the subject.
Okay, like what?
The classic, universally used example. All bachelors are unmarried. Or, a triangle has three sides. You do not learn any new information about the world from an analytic statement. It simply unpacks and clarifies what the word already means. If you know what a bachelor is, you already know he's unmarried.
It's an internal loop of language. Now, what about the other side?
A synthetic judgment is the exact opposite. It synthesizes or glues together two distinct concepts to give you brand new information that wasn't there before. All dogs bark. Or, the apple on my desk is red. The concept of barking is not strictly definitionally contained in the concept of dog. There are dogs that don't bark. The concept of red is not in the definition of apple. By connecting them, you are synthesizing new information about the world.
Okay, so that's the first axis, analytic, which is definitional truth, versus synthetic, which is informational truth. The second axis is about how we know the statement is true. What is the source of our justification? He divides this into a priori and a posteriori.
A priori knowledge translates roughly to from the earlier. This is knowledge that is entirely independent of sensory experience. You can figure it out purely with your reason, sitting in an armchair prior to going out and experiencing the world.
And a posteriori knowledge translates to from the later. This is empirical knowledge derived strictly from sensory experience. You literally have to go look at the world, run an experiment, or touch an object to know if the statement is true.
Exactly.
Aye.
So Kant takes these two axes and crosses them to make a four-box grid. Let's look at the boxes.
Okay.
First, we have analytic a priori. A triangle has three sides. It's true by definition, which is analytic, and you know it internally without needing to observe the physical world, which is a priori. This is the safe, unproblematic realm of logic that both rationalists and empiricists happily agree exists.
Second box, we have synthetic a posteriori. The apple on my desk is red. It provides new information, synthetic, and you absolutely have to go observe the actual apple to know if it's true, a posteriori. This is the standard realm of empirical science and daily observation. Again, everyone agrees this exists.
Now, what about the third box, analytic a posteriori? A statement that is true merely by definition, but somehow you need physical experience to know it. That's a logical contradiction. It's a useless box. It doesn't exist.
Which leaves the fourth box in the grid. And this fourth box is Kant's absolute stroke of world-changing genius. He identifies a category of knowledge that the previous philosophers had either missed, ignored, or fundamentally misunderstood. Synthetic a priori.
This is the Holy Grail. Synthetic a priori knowledge is knowledge that provides brand new information about the structure of the world, synthetic, but which we know is universally and necessarily true without ever needing empirical observation to prove it a priori.
This sounds impossible. How can I know a new fact about the world without looking at the world? Give me an example of this magic knowledge.
Kant points directly to mathematics. Take the simple equation 7 plus 5 equals 12. Prior to Kant, philosophers thought math was just analytic, true by definition. But Kant argues this is actually synthetic. The concept of the number 12 is not analytically inherently contained inside the concept of 7 or 5 or the symbol plus. When you add them together, your mind performs a creative synthesis to reach a completely new piece of numerical information.
Okay, I synthesized 12, but why is it a priori?
Because it is universally necessarily true, and you don't need sensory experience to prove it. You don't need to go out into the woods, find 7 literal apples, put them next to 5 literal apples, and count them every single time you do math to prove it equals 12. You know it is universally true through the internal structure of reason alone.
And Kant's masterstroke is that it's not just math that lives in this fourth box. Kant argues that the foundational structural principles of physics are also synthetic a priori. For example, let's go back to Hume's nightmare. Every event must have a cause. Hume had said this was just a biological habit because we can't physically observe the cause.
Kant says Hume was exactly right that we can't observe causation with our eyes, but Hume was completely wrong to conclude that causation is therefore just a flimsy psychological habit. Every event has a cause is a synthetic a priori truth. It provides new information about the universe, and it is universally unconditionally true independent of our experience.
But I am stuck here playing the skeptic. How is this physically possible? How can we know necessary truths about the world before we experience the world? If we don't observe causation, how do we know it's a rule? This leads to what philosophers call Kant's Copernican revolution.
It is the perfect analogy. Before Copernicus, astronomers believed the entire universe revolved around the Earth. The math was messy and didn't work. Copernicus inverted the model. He realized the Earth is the observer and it revolves around the sun. Suddenly, the math worked perfectly.
And Kant executes the exact same inversion in philosophy.
Right. Before Kant, everyone assumed that the human mind had to passively conform to the objects in the world. Kant says no. The objects in the world must conform to the active structure of the human mind.
I want to really dig into this because this is the core of reality as we know it. The mind is not a blank slate, but it also doesn't possess preloaded factual ideas about God or geometry. Instead, Kant argues that the mind comes equipped from birth with a fixed, unalterable formatting software.
Exactly. The mind brings the rigid structure, and the external world provides the raw sensory data. Think of the mind as an extremely complex filter. Kant says the mind automatically imposes what he calls forms of intuition upon all incoming data from the universe. These two mandatory forms are space and time.
Wait, space and time aren't real.
Kant's radical claim is that space and time are not physical things floating out there in the empty universe. They are not absolute containers that objects sit inside. Space and time are the fixed biological lenses, the required software through which the human mind is forced to process experience. You cannot perceive an object except as existing in space. You cannot perceive an event except as happening in time, because that is the only way your mind's software knows how to render reality. Space and time are the interface.
And once the raw data is filtered through the interface of space and time, Kant says the mind's intellect steps in and applies what he calls the categories of understanding. There are 12 of these built-in categories, and they include things like substance, plurality, and crucially, causality.
This is how Kant completely solves Hume's problem of induction. Remember, Hume said we never see the physical link of causation between the billiard balls. Kant says, of course we don't see it out there in the world. Causation isn't a physical link in the universe. Causation is the mandatory organizational filing system our brain uses to make sense of the sequence of events.
So the reason I know the dropped glass will fall tomorrow isn't because I've observed it enough times to form a habit. It's because my brain literally cannot process reality without applying the rule of cause and effect.
Exactly. We don't have to worry that tomorrow the laws of physics will break because our minds literally construct our experience of reality using the category of causation. Causality is a necessary, non-negotiable precondition for having any coherent human experience at all. Kant saves science by proving that the fundamental rules of science are the very rules by which the human mind constructs reality.
So what does this all mean for us? I'm trying to visualize this. Is Kant essentially saying that human beings are born wearing a permanent, irremovable pair of biological, virtual reality goggles? Let's say the universe is just emitting raw, unknowable code. Our senses pick up that code, but our VR headset automatically formats it into a 3D spatial grid, flowing linear time and solid physical objects interacting via cause and effect.
Yes.
We can never take the headset off.
Yes.
We can never see the real universe, the raw code. We only ever experience the simulation our mind software renders for us.
That is a brilliant modernization of his theory. If we connect this to the bigger picture, yes, that is the exact boundary of human knowledge that Kant establishes. Because of this formatting, Kant divides reality into two distinct realms. First, there is the phenomena.
The phenomenal world.
This is the world as it appears to us, displayed on the screens of our VR goggles. It is entirely structured by space, time, and causality. And Kant says we can have absolute, certain, mathematically precise scientific knowledge about the phenomenal world because our own minds built the rules for it. Science is perfectly valid, but it is valid only for the human simulation.
But that implies there's something outside the simulation, the second realm.
The noumena.
The noumena, which Kant also calls things in themselves. This is the underlying universe as it exists completely independently of our human perception. This is the raw code sitting on the server outside the VR headset. And Kant says, definitively and somewhat tragically, the noumena is forever, permanently unknowable to human beings.
Why can't we ever know it? Because to know anything, you have to run it through your software. You have to apply space, time, and causality. But the thing in itself doesn't exist in space or time. Space and time are our additions. Therefore, we cannot know what reality looks like when it is not being looked at by a human. We just have to accept by logical necessity that it is out there, providing the raw data. But its true, unformatted nature is fundamentally off limits to our reason and our senses forever.
Kant achieved his grand synthesis. He brought the war to an end. He validated the empiricists by confirming that absolutely all our knowledge begins with sensory experience. We desperately need the raw data. The white paper needs the ink. But he validated the rationalists by proving that the mind brings an active, innate, immensely powerful structural framework to that experience. Thoughts without content are empty. Intuitions without concepts are blind.
It is a masterful, sweeping resolution to the greatest conflict in philosophy. But it came with a heavy existential price, the admission of our permanent biological epistemic blindness to the ultimate nature of reality. The thing in itself remains a mystery we can never solve.
Let's take a breath and recap the incredible, dizzying journey of this deep dive. We started by sitting next to René Descartes by his stove in 1619, tearing down the entire universe with the terror of radical doubt and the evil demon, only to try and rebuild it entirely out of pure, innate reason, the unshakable rationalist fortress.
Then we watched John Locke arrive with the empiricist eraser, wiping the slate completely clean, arguing that every complex thought, every soaring idea we have, is built entirely from the simple, grounded building blocks of sensory experience and internal reflection.
Which inadvertently opened the door for David Hume to push empiricism to the brink of the abyss, showing us that if we rely only on the senses, we can't even prove that one billiard ball causes another to move, threatening to collapse all of science into mere animal habit.
We witnessed the brilliant rationalist resistance from Leibniz, arguing through his dialogues that the mind is a bustling, active place, full of minute perceptions and innate structural harmonies, glowing like embers waiting to be unlocked by experience.
And finally, we found our footing with Immanuel Kant, who brilliantly merged the two streams. The noumenal world provides the raw sensory data, the mind provides the structural VR goggles of space, time, and causality, rendering the secure, phenomenal world we know and study while leaving the ultimate truth of the universe forever beyond our grasp.
And you, listening to this, might be thinking this is all just ancient academic history. But I promise you, you are actively participating in this exact epistemological debate every single day of your life. When you read a conflicting scientific study about nutrition, or when you argue with a friend about whether a specific political policy actually caused a specific economic outcome, or even when you simply try to decide if you can trust your own memory of an event, you are navigating the intense tension between your sensory data and your logical models.
Are you trusting the empirical data, the matters of fact? Or are you trusting your rational model of how the world logically ought to work? We are all, in every argument, constantly adjusting our own inner synthesis of rationalism and empiricism.
It is the invisible operating system of our daily lives.
It really is. But I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. If Kant is right, and human minds are strictly formatting reality through biological VR goggles of space and time, just so our brains can understand it, what happens when we finally build true artificial intelligence? We are currently creating digital minds that do not possess our biological hardware. Will an advanced AI, entirely free from our human evolutionary VR goggles, processing data in dimensions and speeds we can't even visualize, will it experience the noumena? Will an AI perceive the true, unfiltered universe, the thing in itself, in a way we are fundamentally biologically blind to? And if it does see the true reality, how will it ever explain it to us through our limited interface?
That is a staggering, chilling thought for the future of epistemology.
It really is. The next time you pour a glass of water and you see a spoon or a stick looking broken beneath the surface, remember, the real question isn't whether the stick is broken. The real question is whether the water, the glass, the stick, and the very space they occupy are just the software your mind is using to keep you from seeing what is actually there.